Yes, you want to hear something? Hours before we were preparing to return to Barbados, a message came through into our project group chat. Our architect had gone to the house, and what he saw, my diaspora friends, didn't match what we had been told. Just one day earlier, we had received an update that almost all the windows had been installed. But after seeing the site himself, the architect wrote some words to the effect of, "You told me yesterday that all but 2 windows were installed. SMH," which is shake my head. Now imagine receiving that while you're preparing to fly thousands of miles to see the project for yourself. Because at this point, we were no longer talking about a project that had just started. We were 1 year in. The original August completion date had already passed. The roof was finally poured. Our windows and doors were sitting in Barbados, and yet the picture we were receiving digitally and the picture beginning to emerge physically were moving further apart. Welcome back to Building Back Home with Jackie.
Yeah, man, the vision's strong. Building back home where I belong. Ooh, yeah. But every foundation got a story to tell about the unseen cracks and the caution bell. So come walk with me through the sun and the rain. On Jackie's journey, we gon' rise again.
I'm Jackie, a document controller, a diaspora home builder, an international risk taker, and as I always tell you, a fisherman's daughter who learned that when you're out at sea to pay attention when the current start changes. And family, the current was changing. Let me get my glasses. Before we move any further though, I want to state here that the experiences shared in this episode are based on my personal construction journey building a home in Barbados. They are presented for educational and documentary purposes to encourage better planning and documentation, communication, and project oversight, particularly for those building remotely, you and I from the diaspora. Some names and identifying details have been omitted or generalized. The communications referenced in this episode reflect messages and calls and photographs and observations documented at the time. My comments reflect my understanding and observation during that period and should not be interpreted as legal, engineering, financial, or other advice. Jackie's project log. As I said, this would be a new introduction as we move forward to see where we are in the project. You see that we purchased that land in 1999, and another event in October 2024, there was groundbreaking with the Bobcat. By January 2025, the contract was signed by Luke and I. August 2025, the original completion target date was when the house was supposed to be completed. Then September 8th, the roof was poured finally. September 19th, the windows and doors were delivered. And this is October 20th. 1 year since groundbreaking. Now at November 2025, the visit for Barbados is approaching. And that is where we pick up the journey. October 20th, 2025, 1 year, one full year since we had broken ground. And anniversaries have a way of making you look backwards. I remember the excitement of seeing that land finally disturbed after owning it since 1999. Remember the bobcat, the dirt, the dream. Back then, I don't think Luke and I imagined that 1 year later we'd still be having conversations about schedules, unfinished stages, financial reconciliations, and when certain windows would be installed. Remember, our expected completion date had been August. August 2025 had come and August had gone. September gave us two major milestones. The roof was poured September 8th. Our windows and doors arrived in Barbados on September 19th. And in episode 10, I told you how those milestones gave us hope, but didn't restore our confidence. Now we were approaching our November trip, and the document controller in me was getting louder. On October 20th, we formally requested information that, in my opinion, as the client, we needed to properly understand where the project stood. Not emotion, not assumption, records. We asked for updated financial information. We've been asking for updated financial information, receipts for payments made, a phase-by-phase progress report, an update on the delayed window and door installation, information on outstanding wall adjustments. We asked for at least give us some regular photo and video reporting, because 1 month earlier we had received another timeline, weeks, not months, and if that schedule was accurate, we should have been approaching a very different stage of construction. I also suggested that if the contractor couldn't personally be present, someone need to be delegated to manage the work, maybe a foreman or a responsible person, somebody who could keep the project moving. Because here's one of the things my professional life had taught me. A schedule without resources is just a date on a piece of paper. And at that point, I wasn't interested only in dates. I wanted to understand the resources behind them. But while I was looking at documents, our architect was looking at the building. He had visited the site on Friday, October the 17th, and his observations raised more questions. According to his report, there were approximately 3 or 4 men working on site, plastering the ceiling of a first floor bedroom. But several items previously identified still hadn't been addressed. Other adjustments remained outstanding. And then there was a sequence of work. Some walls had already been primed before the electrical boxes and switches had been properly cut or pulled or pinned. Yeah, think about that. Finish one operation only to potentially disturb it again to complete another. The entrance wasn't finished, the ground floor wasn't sealed, and the kitchen wall identified for alterations was still an issue. Now, I want to be clear. I am not an architect. I am not an engineer. And I'm not going to pretend I'm one right here on YouTube. But I am a document controller. And one thing I understand very well is sequence, predecessors, successors. What has to happen before something else can happen efficiently? And when activities begin appearing out of sequence, you have to ask questions. My daddy taught us something without ever calling it project management. You don't pretty up a boat while ignoring whether she's ready for the sea, or before the boat leaves down Skeets Bay. You check what matters. Is she sound? Is she sealed? Is everything secured? Because the sea doesn't care how pretty your boat looks. If the seams aren't right, the water will find them. So construction started reminding me of the same thing. You can prime a wall and you can photograph progress. You can talk about finishes. But if the work underneath isn't ready, eventually the unfinished pieces start talking. And on October 21st, the contractor responded, and his explanation introduced another layer. Some of the work we were questioning, he explained, belonged to element 4. But according to his position, element 4 had not been commissioned. There were explanations for the sequencing, and the ceiling plastering, for example, was being done before the windows to help protect the windows from dirt later. There was also a disagreement surrounding the kitchen wall. From his position, that wall had already been demolished, rebuilt, and replastered at his expense, and he wasn't prepared to repeat that work. And he also maintained that items outside the formal elemental breakdown shouldn't simply be described as snags, as what the architect told him. And I want to be fair here. This podcast isn't about taking every disagreement and declaring that one side was automatically right. Construction contracts have terminology. Scopes have boundaries. And people can interpret responsibilities differently. But from our side, as the homeowners, Luke and I, there was a much simpler issue. We were 1 year into the project. So regardless of what something was called, whether it's element 4, a snag, a variation, outstanding work, we still needed to understand what was complete, what wasn't, what had our money paid for, and when was the remaining work actually going to be finished. October 27th, we were told window and door installation would begin. Oh, that was encouraging. October 28th, calls went unanswered. Then another day, then another day, then another day. And what followed was one of the most difficult things for anyone managing construction from overseas. Silence. Silence. For almost 3 weeks, communication became extremely limited. Calls weren't being returned. Messages weren't producing the level of information we needed. And when you're in New York and your construction project is in Barbados, silence feels different. You can't get in your car after work and drive past this site. You can't say, Saturday, I can stop by this Saturday morning. You can't usually ask the workers what's happening. Your phone, your photographs, your reports, and the people you trust on the ground become your eyes. So when communication disappears, your visibility disappears with it. This is where my document control compass started pointing somewhere different. Earlier in the journey, we were documenting progress. Now, I was documenting gaps in information, dates of calls, unanswered messages, promises for photographs, promises for videos, revised timelines, what was said, when it was said, and what eventually happened. For diaspora builders, please hear me on this. Document silence too. Put it down in writing. Log it. Log that silence, that time you haven't heard, the period of time you haven't had any communication. Because sometimes what isn't communicated becomes just as important to your project record as what is. Then, November 11th, communication returned. The explanation involved problems with the contractor's phone and WhatsApp. We were also told that my brother had been visiting the site, so there was an understanding that information had been getting back to us. And yes, our family members were helping us. We've talked about that throughout this journey. My brothers, my relatives, people stopping by or sending a picture, telling us about the activity happening or not, calling us. But here's something I understand much better today. Family observations is not a substitute for contractual project reporting. My brother shouldn't have to become our project reporting system. He was doing us a favor. The project team still had its own responsibilities. A progress video was promised to us before the end of the day. And again, nothing. There was a delay. One delay by itself, maybe nothing. One missed call, maybe nothing. A phone problem, it happens. But construction risk doesn't always announce itself with one big major red flag. Sometimes it's 10 little red flags, and they're standing quietly beside each other. Then came November 17th. Our architect reported that after speaking with the contractor, he understood that all but 2 windows had been installed. Now remember, our windows and doors had arrived in Barbados back on September 19th, nearly 2 months earlier. So hearing that almost all of the windows were finally installed was good news, and our trip was just days away. I began arranging a formal meeting for Friday, November the 21st at 9 a.m. because our trip was going to be the day before. We're coming in the Thursday, November the 20th. So Friday, November 21st, 9 a.m., and it will be on site. Sent that to the architect and the contractor from Luke and I. We were going to discuss the financials. We were going to walk the project, review progress, and finally see everything for ourselves. So our flights booked, bags being packed, and our notebook ready, and all our documents that we need to go and get our Trident ID all ready. Then came November 20th, the day before our scheduled site meeting. We received a lengthy message explaining that the contractor had spent approximately the previous week and a half restructuring his team because of workmanship concerns and recurring complaints. Now stop there. Stop. We were more than a year into the construction, days, hours from arriving, and the workforce was being restructured. At almost the same time, the architect visited the site, and that's when the digital picture began collapsing because what he saw did not match the report that he'd received. The windows were not all but two installed, not even close. His reaction appeared in the chat, and now the concern wasn't just progress. The few windows that had been installed needed to be properly pinned in, not a handle, not a lock, needed to be secured and needed to be sealed. There was even a concern about protecting them from possible theft. And remember, these weren't the contracted windows. We had purchased those windows and doors separately. Nothing to do with the contract. So now, hours before flying to Barbados, we weren't simply asking, when will the windows be installed? We were asking, what exactly are we about to find when we get there? Again, I want to stop here because there's something important I don't want this series to lose. There were times throughout this project where we complimented the contractor. You heard that in the last episode. There was workmanship that we were told was good. There were things we ourselves appreciated. And when another construction professional later complimented the aspects such as the brickwork, how neat it was, and how the roof steel had been, the way it was wrapped, I communicated that praise. Because I'm not telling this story to convince you that everything is bad, because it wasn't. Good workmanship deserves acknowledgement, and concerns deserve documentation. Both things can be true at the same time. Our growing concern wasn't simply, is every piece of construction bad? It was much bigger. Could we rely on this communication? Could we rely on this schedule? Could we reconcile the money? And did the progress being reported to us and being reported to us remotely match what was actually happening on site? Those were the questions we were now carrying to Barbados. Looking back now, I can see the warning signs weren't all big or dramatic. Some were in the schedule, some were in the silence, some were in the sequence of the work, and some were simply in the difference between what we were being told and what someone standing on the property could actually see. One by one, you might explain them away, but when you put them together, they start telling a story. So here are today's red flags. I would tell any diaspora builder to pay attention to these red flags. Red flag number 1, work progressing out of sequence can create unnecessary rework. It can create cost and delay. Repeatedly using project terminology without providing you, the homeowner, with a clear picture of overall status can create confusion rather than clarity. Don't get mixed up in all the jargon and the architectural and the construction words, because it can confuse you rather than bring you clarity. Extended communication blackouts are especially serious on remote managed projects. Reported progress that doesn't match the independent site observations. because it requires immediate verification. Major workforce restructuring more than a year into construction deserves questions about the resources, about the quality and the schedule. But you know by now, I don't want to leave you with just the red flags, because every difficult part of this journey has taught Luke and me something. And that's really why I'm sharing this story. Not to tell you don't build back home, because I still believe you can successfully build back home. But I do believe we can build wiser. Ask better questions. Put better systems in place and learn from each other's experiences. So what did this part of the journey teach me? It taught me that I should track what was promised against what was actually completed. Document communication gaps, not only the messages you receive, the gaps. Family members can be valuable eyes on the ground, but they should not become a substitute for formal project reporting. Understand your contract terminology. We'll see that later. But don't allow the terminology to prevent you from asking simple questions about your money, progress, and completion. When remote reports and independent observations don't match, verify. Verify physically as soon as you possibly can. A milestone isn't proof that the entire project is healthy. Consistency is. And perhaps the biggest lesson. Here's my document control compass for this episode. Don't document only when something goes wrong. Document the promises. Document the progress. Document the changes. Document even the silence, because you may not know today which piece of information you'll need tomorrow. Let me ask you here, this is your call to action. What would you do if you were preparing to fly thousands of miles to inspect your project, and the day before you left, you discovered that a major progress update didn't match what someone had physically seen? What would you do? Would you confront the issue immediately? Would you wait until you could see it for yourself? Would you bring in an independent professional, or would you start preparing for something bigger? Tell me in the comments, please. Put it in the comments. And don't forget, share this, subscribe, hit the notification button. Share this with anyone in the diaspora. Share it locally. Share it with anyone building. Share it with anyone who's interested in hearing this story. Remember where we started this episode? Barbados, November 20th, 2025. The messages were saved. The photographs were saved. The unanswered calls were documented. Our 9 a.m. meeting was scheduled, and Luke and I boarded that plane for Barbados. But this trip felt different. In July, we went home to see progress. No roof. This time, we are going home to verify it. The fisherman daughter in me knew something. When the current changes, you don't argue with the sea. You check your compass. You secure the boat and you pay attention. Because tomorrow evening, when we land in Barbados for the first time in months, no WhatsApp wouldn't be between us and the house, and no photographs, no progress reports, no explanations, just us and the project. Friday morning, 9 a.m., locked in St. Philip. And what we're about to see would change the rest of this journey. Next time I'm building back home with Jackie, when the house started talking. Miss Mercedes make some sweet, sweet bread. Got in corn.
From foreign shores, I bring the vision home. Built a legacy from concrete and from stone. Got the blueprints drawn, the white sands calling me. For the diaspora's children, planting the family tree. Building back home against the Atlantic tide. With Bajan roots and all that island pride. Watch the foundation rise, a brand new dawn in store. This ain't just building houses, it's something so much more. Yeah, it's Jackie and Luke building back home in Barbados.